And across the top, he wrote 100 essential country songs. And he said, "This is your education."
For decades, Rosanne Cash kept quiet about something her father told her in his final years. Now, at 70, she's finally opened up about a promise Johnny Cash made before he passed in September 2003.
Oh, it seems a paradox that you don't appreciate what your parents leave you until they're gone.
What he asked of her wasn't what anyone expected, and the reason she waited so long to share it might surprise you even more.
I didn't really put much stock or attention onto the list that my dad gave me.
Johnny Cash expired on September 12, 2003, just 4 months after losing his wife, June Carter Cash. The music world mourned the loss of the man in black, but his family was dealing with something far more personal. Rosanne, his eldest daughter, was carrying the weight of conversations that happened in those final months. Conversations she wouldn't discuss publicly until recently. Born in Memphis on May 24, 1955, Rosanne was Johnny's first child with his first wife, Vivian Liberto. Growing up as Johnny Cash's daughter wasn't the fairy tale people might imagine. Her parents divorced when she was 11 in 1966. By then, Johnny's drinking and pill addiction had already torn the family apart. Rosanne has said in interviews that she barely knew her father during those early years. He was either on the road or caught up in his own struggles. The relationship between Rosanne and Johnny was complicated from the start. After the divorce, Vivian moved Rosanne and her 3 sisters to Southern California. Johnny married June Carter in 1968, and suddenly there was this whole other family. Rosanne spent summers at the Cash compound in Hendersonville, Tennessee, but she's admitted it felt like visiting a stranger's house sometimes. The man she saw on television wasn't always the man who showed up for holidays. Things started to shift in the mid-1970s. Rosanne was 18 when she joined her father's roadshow as a wardrobe assistant and occasional backup singer. She traveled with Johnny, June, and the entire Tennessee 3 setup for nearly 3 years. Those tour bus rides and backstage moments gave them something they'd never really had before. For decades, Rosanne Cash kept quiet about something her father told her in his final years. Started showing up as the father Rosanne had always needed. In 1978, Rosanne moved to London and then to Nashville, determined to build her own music career. She signed with Columbia Records in 1979, the same label her father had been with since 1958. Some people whispered about nepotism, but Rosanne was ready to prove herself. Her 1981 album, 7 Year Ache, went gold and produced 3 #1 singles. She wasn't riding her father's coattails. She was carving her own path, and Johnny respected that. The 1980s were good years for their relationship. Johnny would call Rosanne after hearing her new songs on the radio. He'd offer advice, but he never pushed. According to Rosanne, he understood what it was like to have a famous name and the pressure that came with it. They'd talk about songwriting, about the business, about life on the road. These weren't forced father-daughter moments. They were 2 musicians who happened to be related, sharing notes. By the 1990s, Johnny's health started declining. He was diagnosed with Shy-Drager syndrome in 1997, though doctors later said it was probably autonomic neuropathy caused by diabetes. He could barely walk some days. His hands shook, but he kept recording. The American Recording Series with producer Rick Rubin brought Johnny back into the spotlight, introducing him to a whole new generation. Songs like Hurt showed the world that Johnny Cash still had something to say. June Carter Cash expired on May 15, 2003, after complications from heart surgery. She was 73. Johnny was devastated. They'd been married for 35 years, and June had been his anchor through every storm. Rosanne flew to Nashville immediately. The family gathered at the Hendersonville house, the same place she'd visited as a teenager, now filled with grief instead of music. But Johnny wouldn't hear it. Rumors suggest that, according to Rosanne, he told her that walking away would be the biggest mistake of her life. He said songwriting was in her blood, just like it was in his. He'd seen too many artists quit too early, and he didn't want that for her. He made her promise, right there in that hospital room, that she'd keep writing and recording for as long as she physically could. Rosanne agreed, but she didn't fully understand why it mattered so much to him at the time. She thought maybe he was just being a supportive father, trying to encourage her during his final days. It wasn't until later that she realized what he was really doing. He was trying to save her from the regret he'd seen destroy other people. Johnny had watched plenty of musicians walk away from their art and spend the rest of their lives wishing they hadn't. He'd seen friends succumb to bitterness and addiction after their careers ended. He knew that for people like them, music wasn't just a job. It was how they made sense of the world. Taking that away was like cutting off oxygen. There was another layer to the promise that Rosanne didn't talk about until much later. Johnny also asked her to help preserve the family's musical legacy, but not in the way people might think. He didn't want some sanitized version of the Cash family story. He wanted honesty. He wanted the complicated truths, the addiction, the failed marriages, the redemption, all of it. Rosanne has said that her father understood his own mythology, had gotten out of control. The man in black had become this larger-than-life figure, and somewhere along the way, the real Johnny Cash got lost. He wanted his children, especially Rosanne, to tell the truth about who he really was, the good, the bad, and everything in between. This put Rosanne in a difficult position. Honoring that request meant potentially disappointing fans who preferred the legend. It meant family disagreements. It meant digging up painful memories. But she'd made a promise to a dying man, and that man was her father. There is one more chilling promise that has been recently revealed. According to some sources online and a few articles, it's being said that during a conversation in the hospital, Cash told his daughter Rosanne, "I am going to have breakfast with you soon, and we will tell some jokes and laugh." And Rosanne recounted this conversation recently. After Johnny passed, Rosanne threw herself into work. She released Black Cadillac in 2006, an album directly inspired by the passing away of her father, stepmother, and mother, who'd expired in 2005. The album was raw and honest. Songs like God Is in the Roses dealt with grief head-on. No sugarcoating, no manufactured sentiment, just real emotion from someone processing real loss. Critics praised Black Cadillac for its authenticity. Rosanne won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album, but more importantly, she'd kept the first part of her promise. She was still making music, and she was doing it on her own terms. The next several years tested that promise repeatedly. Rosanne dealt with creative droughts. She struggled with writer's block. There were moments when she questioned whether she should keep going, but every time she considered quitting, she'd remember that hospital room conversation. She'd remember the look in her father's eyes when he made her promise. In 2009, Rosanne released The List, an album of songs her father had given her when she was 18. Johnny had written down a list of 100 essential American songs, everything from Hank Williams to Bob Dylan. He told her that if she wanted to be a serious artist, she needed to know these songs inside and out. The List album featured 12 songs from that original piece of paper, and it became one of Rosanne's most successful releases. Working on that album brought Rosanne closer to understanding what her father had really meant. These songs represented a lineage, a tradition, a responsibility to carry something forward. Johnny wasn't just asking her to keep making music for herself. He was asking her to be part of something bigger than any one person. The second part of the promise, the truth-telling part, proved even harder to honor. Rosanne started writing a memoir, but it took years to complete. She kept stopping and starting, unsure how honest to be. How do you write about your father's addiction without making him look like a villain? How do you discuss his failures as a parent while still expressing love? How do you separate the myth from the man? Composed, a memoir finally came out in 2010. Rosanne didn't hold back. She wrote about feeling abandoned as a child. She wrote about the chaos of Johnny's substance-filled years. She wrote about the awkwardness of joining a family that already existed without her. She also wrote about redemption, forgiveness, and the genuine love that eventually grew between them. The book divided some readers. Some thought she was being disrespectful to her father's memory. Others praised her honesty. Rosanne has said in multiple interviews that writing that memoir was one of the hardest things she's ever done, but it was necessary. She'd promised her father she'd tell the truth, and that meant not pretending their relationship had been perfect. It meant acknowledging that Johnny Cash was human, with all the flaws that come with being human. In 2014, Rosanne released The River and the Thread, an album that won 3 Grammys, including Best Americana Album. She was in her late 50s by then, an age when many artists have long since retired, but the promise kept her going. Every album was a way of honoring what her father had asked of her. Every song was proof that she was still in the fight. The revelation about the promise didn't fully come out until Rosanne hit 70. In recent interviews, she's been more open about those final conversations with her father. She's explained why it took her so long to discuss them publicly. Part of it was grief. Part of it was trying to figure out what it all meant. But mostly, she wanted to make sure she was actually honoring the promise before she talked about it. Looking back now, Rosanne sees her father's request as both a gift and a burden. The gift was knowing that Johnny believed in her talent enough to make it his dying wish. The burden was carrying that responsibility through decades of doubt and difficulty. But she's grateful for both aspects. Without that promise, she's not sure she would have kept going. There's something else Rosanne has revealed about that promise in recent years. Johnny told her that making music was how he dealt with every major challenge in his life. Writing songs was how he processed loss, celebrated joy, worked through anger, and found hope. He said that when he couldn't write or perform, he felt lost. He didn't want that for Rosanne. He wanted her to always have that outlet, that way of making sense of things. This explains why Johnny was so insistent. It wasn't about fame or legacy or keeping the Cash name relevant. It was about giving his daughter the tools she'd need to survive the hardest parts of life. Music had saved him more times than he could count. He wanted to make sure Rosanne had that same lifeline. At 70, Rosanne Cash has kept her promise. She's still writing, still recording, still performing. Her most recent album, She Remembers Everything, came out in 2018 and dealt with themes of memory, time, and resilience. She shows no signs of stopping. In interviews, she talks about new projects, new songs she's working on, new stories she wants to tell. The promise Johnny Cash made Rosanne make wasn't really about music at all. It was about not giving up on yourself. It was about staying connected to the thing that makes you feel most alive. It was about having the courage to tell the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And it was about understanding that real legacy isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Rosanne has said that she thinks about her father every time she sits down to write a song. She wonders if he'd like what she's working on. She imagines him offering feedback the way he used to during those late-night phone calls in the 1980s. The promise turned their relationship into something that didn't end with his passing. It gave them a way to stay connected across the years. So, what do you think about the promise Johnny Cash asked Rosanne to make? Was it fair to put that kind of weight on his daughter? Or was it the greatest gift he could have given her? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as moving as we did, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories about the real lives of country music legends coming your way.